my presentation is from short story to case-based learning. In a way, the title of this presentation could also read from case writing to short story writing. The writing of fiction could lead to the creation of a case study, or it could go in the reverse direction, such that a student may write the story of his or her life at any given point as a short story. The case, quote, imitates or simulates a real situation, unquote. Specifically, writing and research tasks involve exploring how point of view, character, theme, as well as plot structure and setting apply to both cases and to short fiction. During the COVID period, the teaching of writing has changed in that students want to write and talk about how the shutdowns and illnesses have affected their lives, their studies, and their workplaces. How has COVID changed you? And what do you see for yourself in the future? The writing teacher may well ask. Now, you will see, I hope, the slide and feel the motion of the boat. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on this in case anyone gets seasick from it. But to recap a bit of introduction here, the introduction to the paper refers to a university president who wrote an editorial in the Globe and Mail last summer, and his name is Vivek Goel, in which he defined what he thought the future of education was going to be. And he talked about interdisciplinary learning, and he also referred to universities and access through technologies and centuries of tradition. So I see that editorial is rather traditional in approach, but in some ways it fits some of the things I'm going to say. And the second piece that I picked up in the media this past summer that fits what I'm trying to say comes from a journalist, an investigative journalist who was asked to contribute to a magazine with the wonderful name of The Walrus, in which he talks about some of the illusions or some of the myths in regard to education in Canada today, with the false premise, he says, that education, not work and immigration, is the primary aim for most students. In other words, that it's not the primary goal for most students. And I would like to refer briefly to international students. My feeling is that for most of them, education is the primary goal. And in this talk, I suggest that there are multiple goals for people in the same classroom. That's no surprise. And as I make comments about reading, I'm thinking of some of the reading challenges of international students as well. And I'll go back to my slides later. Okay, the first part of this presentation consists of critical interpretation of two short stories using close reading and reader response theory to bring out the nuances in character, plot, and theme. The second part offers on-site observation and study of two classroom situations with the intent of revealing the challenges and possibilities of using fiction as cases. The first section draws attention to literary aspects of fiction, such as language and symbols. It also establishes social contexts, such as leadership and immigration. It demonstrates how writers characterized human attempts to deal with uncertainty. The second part of the discussion provides application of storytelling in the classroom and indicates areas for research in how short stories can provide details and visualization that can bring case study to life. Research questions include the following. What would help post-COVID students in the university classroom become better readers and better writers? How could reading short fiction help business students understand business issues? How can case-based learning in both English and business courses assist students in identifying personality types and conflicts. 2 additional questions captured students' attention. What would you do in this situation and why? What writing would you do? And what would be the intent of it? So could I have 2 or 3 of my slides at this point? And then the next one. And the next one. And the one that follows, I'll go back to that later. Right. Okay, moving along to a discussion of methods. Next slide, please. A basic definition of reader response criticism shows that the reader, the reading process, and response mark out an area for investigation. Reading and then responding and writing become linked. The emphasis shifts from narrator or author of a text to the reader. This method of presenting reading focuses on the reader's questions, disturbances, and disruptions, concerns for missing parts of a text, and identification of what she or he finds significant. This approach fits well into student-centered learning environment. Genres overlap so that stories are not grouped initially as either fiction or based on actual events. Often approaches to case-based learning involve faculty using existing case studies or creating their own. In either situation, students can choose to see the case as a story, quote, rather than stripping the case to decontextualized facts. It is better to design the case as a story. The story reveals a dilemma or problem that the characters are facing. It should explain to the reader what each character did and how he or she interpreted the dilemmas and practical contingencies. And this last is a quotation from a well-known person on campus, Graham. That is Paul Graham. Another approach is to have students devise case studies themselves and post them to others. Overall, in this paper, the main emphasis is on the arts-based movement in writing studies and what has been described as the arts-based qualitative paradigm. This approach to literary analysis and writing emerged from creating and teaching a course in workplace fiction. In teaching this course, I have asked students to consider what they want to get out of their chosen work, how fiction writers dramatize workplace relationships, situations, and problems, and how they can use their writing as a way to better understand the conflicts, whether moral, physical, or mental, at work today. And this is part of the section in my study called Discussion and Analysis. The project took further shape in spring 2021 in a writing course designed to link English to business. To achieve such integration of study areas, I created mini cases, and once students got used to the assignments, I used a case from the course textbook, Business Writing for Everyone, that presented a publishing company intern struggling to research and write a recommendation report with solutions to the problem of diversity in characterization in children's books. A case study begins with a short story, yet some learners have limited background in reading fiction and not much motivation to do so. 2 short stories, one from early 20th century and the other published in 2020, reveal elements of leadership and supervision of employees in differing workplaces. Could I have the next slide, please? Going on from there. Next one. Yes, thank you. The Secret Share by famous British writer Joseph Conrad provides readers with a newly appointed captain of a ship returning from the South China Seas to England, whereas Picking Worms by Sublakam Nathangansa, winner of the 2021 Scotia Giller Prize for Fiction, shows us a young immigrant mother from Laos who is disrupted in her farming and family tasks by an ambitious young man who takes charge. Both stories inscribe the theme of alienation at work. Both demonstrate the challenges of a working life. As one critic of workplace fiction states, quote, Literature that engages the subject of work thereby proclaims work to be a proper subject of our notice, ultimately a moral transaction. Okay, I'm looking, if you keep going with the slides, next one, please. Keep going. Okay, great. Using fiction to understand people and events. The value of reading fiction is learning to see the world through someone else's eyes. Additionally, the advantage of converting fiction to case study is to understand how fiction writers create gaps in the narrative, missing parts to a story that may be useful in thinking of the story and case connection. Of course, reading fiction also prevents professionals from overlooking the human dimension. Turning to the secret share then, the captain of Conrad's story is new to his assignment as leader. He does not know any of the crew who have been together for 18 months, or the two officers who report to him, or the ship itself. He admits, quote, "I was somewhat of a stranger to myself," unquote. He is familiar with the route that the ship will take back to England, but not the stress of his responsibility as leader. He does not trust readers with the knowledge of how or why he got this appointment, but his nervousness and fears of failing to live up to his ideal view of himself are evident in his first order to the crew to get some sleep, while he alone becomes familiar with the tropical sea and the ship. He narrates the story of his adjustment to his new job and explains on this first evening, as captain, he feels his hand, quote, "resting lightly on the ship's rail, as if on the shoulder of a trusted friend," unquote. Then he glances down and sees a man holding the rope side ladder. He greets the man and brings him on board. He discovers the man's name is Leggett, a former first mate who has escaped from another ship where he killed a subordinate in the height of a storm for refusing to obey an order. Soon a bond develops between the two men. A mysterious communication was already established between us in the face of that silent, darkened, tropical sea. As the captain tries to hide Leggett in his cabin, he develops deeper and more ambivalent thoughts about the situation of the other man. In a way, Leggett becomes his double, his other self, from whom he gathers strength, yet appreciates that the only way he can save the other man is by taking him to a place where he can escape British law. In moving from the short story to a case study, the first step is to pull out the identities of the two officers. The first mate is, according to the captain, painstaking in relating events to himself, and he likes to say, "Bless my soul, you don't say so." He makes gestures to the crew behind the captain's back, to the effect that the new captain is crazy. As for the second mate, he seems to pick up information quickly, but he's not insightful. The steward who cleans the captain's cabin is puzzled by the anxiety of his boss concerning the bathroom. All of the crew are terrified when the captain takes the ship close into the islands. They fear that their new leader will foolishly shipwreck them all and like to see him as possessing, quote, "ludicrous eccentricities," unquote. The structure of the short story is based on the use of doubles: two ships, two captains, two officers, and two key characters who are linked, with one potentially evil and the other potentially moral. There are two sections to the plot. The first part concludes with the arrival of the captain from the other ship, the Sephora. The two captains are a study in contrast. One is new, the other is experienced. The captain of the Sephora also has his wife on board. After he leaves, having seen the whole ship without any presence of the convict, the other captain and further events lead to a climax. In trying to get the captain's rain jacket, the steward comes close to revealing Leggett's presence in his cabin. The situation cannot last, the captain knows, and he begins to look for a way of allowing his double to escape. To write a case, as writer, I might ask myself, if my delight in swimming and sailing has an impact on how I see the captain's situation. Some other researchers might explore the negative features of leadership, such as the brutal way Leggett strangles the sailor who disobeys him, or investigate the British Marine merchant service during the historical period. If we jump ahead to the context of COVID-19 and the job situations for natives and immigrants as they might appear in fiction, we might expect an array of robots. However, in my second story example from the 2020 story collection called How to Pronounce Knife, a teenage girl and her mother go out at night to a hog farm to pick worms and connect them in styrofoam cups. The girl is aware that her mother is clever, moving about in bare feet, often without a headlight, enjoying the task. At age 14, the girl is not as quick as her mother, but she keeps working because she has the belief that a job is a job, and even in one like that, you could still have your dignity. In the meantime, the girl meets a boy, James, who also takes up worm picking, works for a while without pay, and does so well with it that he becomes their manager. The girl understands James's success in this way. Back in Laos, the men who worked in this field had been doctors, teachers, farmers with their own land. None had set out for a life spent crouching down in the soft earth, and they picked like it. James had never seen or been anything else except a kid. James picked like a man who was free.
Alexander, you just have 2 minutes left.
2 minutes, okay. The mother is so angry with James and the way he has destroyed her happiness that she refuses to go along with her daughter's plan to go to a school dance. To make this story into a case study, the writer research could draw on qualitative strategies, even assuming the role of ethnographer. The exploration could involve further investigation into psychology of medicine, definitions of trauma. The case study becomes an example of the trauma victim. The writer of the case could provide more details than the minimalist realist style that the fiction writer presents. The analysis of the case would start with the background of the war. To start the research, the writer might compose questions to ask a group of immigrant workers and thus document their feelings of oppression. Conclusion: work in the broadest sense is described as labor, as chores, as business, as duty, as habit, as memory, as art, and as priestly vocation. Case study and reading or writing fiction can assist students in recognizing and accepting those who hold positions different from their own. Both stories reveal that work arrangements are rarely moral, and in Canada today, immigrant workers are victimized. Both stories anticipate a new reality in which humans at work are detached from one another, caught up in anger and fear, and controlled by the protocols of impersonal labor relations. The virus-infected world provides a new way to look at Conrad's conclusion to the sacred share, in which Leggett, the secret member of the captain's space, lets go of a rope connecting him to the ship, slips into unexplored waters but near shore, quote, a proud swimmer, striking out for a new destiny. Is this the new destiny we are facing after COVID?
Thank you so much, Alex.